and we will record this webinar. If everyone, as you join, please put in the chat your name and who you're with, and we will start in just a minute.
Weird.
So I think we will get started just with introductions and give a few more people time to join. Welcome, everyone, to this panel on migration or markets on the move. And yes, as you join, please put your name and who you're with in the chat. And I'm going to also, again, put up the slide with how you turn on the translation. So down, you can click on the translation button to get simultaneous translation in English, Spanish, or French. And welcome, everybody. I'm going to do quick introductions of our presenters today. We have two facilitators. Maria Jimena Peronigali. Jimena is a member of the MIC Advisory Committee, and she's also the CashCap NORCAP Regional Interagency Senior Cash Markets and SRSP Advisor. She's a cash and market specialist with a focus on shock responsive social protection, with more than 15 years of experience in development and humanitarian programming with governments, UN, and NGOs. And her focus is on collaborative ways of working to improve effectiveness in humanitarian responses in disasters, displacement, migration, and refugee settings. Our other facilitator is Carrie Goldner-Byrne, who is also on the MIC Advisory Committee, and she's a senior market systems advisor. She has 25 years of leadership and program management experience using market systems and private sector approaches in humanitarian and development contexts with technical expertise in food security, resilience, financial inclusion, entrepreneurship, job creation, and leveraging private sector investment. She also focuses on defining best practice for market and livelihoods work in fragile states. And our two presenters are Samantha Holben, who's the chief of party for the USAID-funded Maharo Resilience and Food Security activity in Madagascar that is managed by CRS. And she has more than 20 years of experience in international development, project leadership and management, working in consulting firms, NGOs, and USAID in many countries around the world. And our other presenter is Miguel Ángel García Arias, who's the regional director for Acción contra la Fame in Central America. And he has 25 years of experience in humanitarian action, rural development, and international cooperation. Recently, he's been specializing in studying the links between migration and development in migrant households and in communities of origin. So over now to Carrie and Jimena to lead us off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here today. Jimena, take your mic off because we're just going to have a conversation now, right? Or turn your mic on so we can have a proper conversation. And that's really what we want to do today is have a conversation. We don't claim that anybody has all the answers. We're showing some good examples today, but we kind of expect that this will raise more questions than it gives you answers. But Jimena and Sasha and lots of others on the MIC, we've been talking about this idea of this conversation for some time. I know for myself, my interest in the topic came from a really great paper I saw that from Mercy Corps, and Beza Tesfaye at Mercy Corps did this paper on challenging the dominant paradigm that we have in of development in place, right? And it really got me thinking that we don't think enough about how people on the move, um, how we need to design our programs differently. I mean, Jimena, jump in here because I know you've been having the same kind of thoughts that I've been having. Is that we're not quite using the tools and the resources that we have, in my opinion. Yeah.
Hey, how are you? Yes, sure. So yeah, effectively, we started both having also this conversation, and that's how MIG works. We start having conversations. We have start having dialogues in the discourse MIG, and we pose questions, and then we try to ask the different partners and practitioners and market practitioners out there, what are your concern? And so how is that conversation started? And in my case, it's as a regional from Latin America and the Caribbean, human mobility is an issue, of course, from a humanitarian setting point of view, and how human mobility leads to humanitarian needs and crisis situation, right? So it started from there, and it started to wonder and to ask between us and the IC and in the MIC, what's the role of markets, and building on how market-based programming can be an added value when we are talking about human mobility. And so I pose that question to you, Carrie. How did you reflect on this added value
Well, it's
situation,
interesting.
right?
So I find I'm reading more and more about it. It also came up at the Market Systems Symposium. There was this kind of light bulb moment for some of the practitioners about how, in some ways, you're just talking about more complex labor markets, right? And in other ways, I think it's much more than that. One of the recent documents I read was talking about how we aren't telling the story. I mean, there's so much negative stuff about migration in the press, right? But we're not. And when you hear positive stories, they tend to be positive stories for individual households. And I think we're going to hear some of those examples today. But there's very little that talks about the positive impacts of migration for communities or countries even. And I think, we don't have any language in the development and the humanitarian practitioner space. We don't have any language for talking about how to design our programs so that they can really serve how people move, like what happens to people along the way. And I'm super excited. I know I keep talking about these resources. I'll put them in the chat along the way. But there is this USAID resource that was just done, an agency learning priority document on migration. And if we're really lucky, we might even have the author of that somewhere in the audience here today. But what I liked about it was it actually talked about what we can do at these different steps. And I think for me, what I hope we talk about today is taking it to the practical. Anybody who knows me, I'm always trying to take it to the practical because I think there are tools out there. I think there's research out there, but because of all that negative press, everybody's kind of shying away from it and doesn't want to talk about the fact that migration is a completely legitimate income stream, or pathway to new income. It doesn't have to be illegal. It doesn't have to be bad. With climate change happening, kind of feels like we need to grapple with this a little bit more and make it trend towards positive, and we're engaging with it in positive ways instead of always trying to pretend that our programming is gonna stop it, because that's just not always realistic. I don't know. What do you think, Jimena?
I will build on the language aspect because also I think it's interesting because we want to understand, if we want really to understand how market-based programming can be an added value, we need to understand also how markets behave in the different point of the origin of the journey, right? In transit, in return, in origin, in destiny. So I would really want to encourage market practitioners to always do their due diligence, conversation and dialogue with migration experts or with human mobility experts, because when we are talking about mixed settings, right, we have this IDP and refugees settings, we have refugees and asylum seekers, we have migration and refugee settings, we have displacement, which can be evacuation, it can be internal, it can be cross-border with different challenges, can be protracted. We have transit situation with its own peculiarities. And we also have the voluntary multi-causal phenomenon of migration, which, as you were saying, it can be a coping mechanism, it can be adaptive mechanism, it can be a way, but also a way to build resilience within their own communities. And migration, it can be a diaspora migrants are really have an important role to play in disaster risk reduction.
Yeah.
And in the way they bring the source of financial support into the origin of communities, the knowledge
Absolutely.
that they bring into origin. And this is really important because we have the legal, we have the regular pathway and the regular pathways. And I think that circular migration perspective that Miguel also will enlighten us with the experience, it's a fantastic experience of regular pathway and how this and understanding the great value that markets, in this case labor markets, can have, will enlighten us into a conversation. So Carrie, I would put the question to you, because when we're talking about markets, what type of markets are we talking about that interact on when we are talking about the different pathways and mobility of people?
Well, I think we're talking about all different kinds of markets. I mean, you can be, what we've got today, and I feel like I'm all set up and ready to hear from Miguel. So I'll answer super quickly, but then I think we should hear from our other colleagues today. And I think this is the thing is migration deals with both international ones, which is what gets into the press all the time. But we have an example from Madagascar, which it's an internal market. And it's still this idea of households are really spreading their risk when they do this, right? They've got the stuff that they do at home normally, maybe it's agriculture, and then the family members who are migrating are often helping that same family have different ways that the funding is coming into the household. So it's in so many ways it's about spreading risk. But enough from us, I think, Jimena. I think people are excited to hear our speakers today. So maybe we should maybe you can introduce us to Miguel again.
I will introduce.
Just
also in line what you were saying, in type of market, we have labor market, we have remittance markets, we have illicit markets also, which lead to protection risk, etc. But I would really like to focus now on the regular pathway. And as I was saying, circular migration, it's and temporary regular migration, it's an excellent pathway, an example to show the impacts of the community in the community of origin. And I think that this research, this experience that Miguel from Acción contra el Hambre will bring, it's fantastic, and in collaboration with IOM. So I will leave now to Miguel. Now for English speakers, you will have to switch to the interpretation in English, and Miguel will be presenting in Spanish, so Spanish speakers can go into the audio, the mainstream audio. So welcome, Miguel, bienvenido, todo tuyo.
Hola. Hola, buenos días a todos. Ahora mismo hablando desde España, pero con ideas y con mensajes que vienen sobre todo desde Centroamérica, que es donde normalmente me encuentro trabajando. Y lo que voy a compartir con todos ustedes son contraposiciones de lo que podríamos decir las peores consecuencias de una gestión desordenada de la migración, como lamentablemente ocurre en la mayoría de los lugares y en la actualidad. Y frente a esto también algunas experiencias de cómo familias, de cómo personas desde Centroamérica están consiguiendo incorporarse a canales ordenados y seguros de migración laboral, de migración circular en concreto. Y me gustaría pedirles que, por favor, para hacer esto también más útil, que tuvieran a la mano un bolígrafo, una libreta o si quieren pueden utilizar la calculadora del móvil, del celular, para hacer algunos cálculos que les voy a compartir, ya que estamos hablando de mercado. De mercado y también de personas, porque eso al final es lo más importante. Creo que ven mi pantalla, ¿no? ¿Ven cómo se va moviendo? ¿Sí? ¿Me confirman? Creo que sí.
Sí,
Bueno,
sí, sí.
de acuerdo, pues
Yes, we can.
ok, gracias. Me gustaría que en esta hoja o que mentalmente pensaran en cuál es el porcentaje de personas que tienen la categoría de migrantes internacionales, siendo la definición de un migrante internacional, pues una persona que vive en un país distinto al que nació. 2 segundos para que piensen la cifra. La cifra real es 3,6% de migrantes hay ahora mismo en el mundo. Pero claro, esto se distribuye de una forma muy diferente en los distintos países. Aquí podemos ver dentro de lo que son países de la OCDE el porcentaje de población que ha nacido en el exterior. Tenemos desde Luxemburgo, con prácticamente la mitad de su población que nació en el extranjero, y México, que es un país muy importante en la ruta migratoria desde Sudamérica y Centroamérica hacia Estados Unidos, que solo tiene un 1% de población nacida en el extranjero. Quédense con esa cifra porque es importante, un contraste muy importante. Y Estados Unidos, un 14%. Cuando hablamos de drivers de migración, pues tenemos un marco que OIM lo resume y lo expresa muy bien. Yo quería destacar cuáles son en los distintos trabajos, los distintos estudios que estamos llevando a cabo en Centroamérica sobre cuáles son las razones que nos dan las personas en movimiento por las cuales se han lanzado a ese camino desde Sudamérica o Centroamérica hacia Estados Unidos, y de forma sistemática en los distintos estudios en los que estamos trabajando sale por encima de todo la falta de empleo como un elemento fundamental. Esto es un análisis que hicimos en Centroamérica en 2024. Este es un trabajo previo que hizo Programa Mundial de Alimentos y MPA, donde también las razones económicas, las razones laborales están entre las primeras. Son la causa directa, ¿no? Esa problemática económica y laboral, que puede ser que tenga causas subyacentes relacionadas con la violencia, relacionadas con el cambio climático, pero lo que la gente expresa cuando se le pregunta por qué usted ha decidido viajar hacia el norte, siempre, mayoritariamente o casi siempre, son razones de tipo económico y laboral. Pero claro, para entender ahí creo que vendrá bien el juego de la calculadora. Háganse a la idea que ahora mismo en Guatemala tenemos el 60% de la población en situación de pobreza, que hay un 30% de población con contrato formal, el resto de la población, un 70%, no tiene ningún contrato con derecho laboral que vaya asociado, y que el salario promedio está en torno a los $12 al día, mientras que una canasta básica de alimentos en Guatemala tiene un coste de $13 al día. O sea que ni teniendo trabajo consigue garantizar la alimentación que requiere tu familia. Y por otro lado hay factores de atracción de estas personas desde el lado de Estados Unidos relacionadas con el mercado laboral. En el 2023 había prácticamente 10 millones de vacantes por cubrir. El salario promedio de una hora en labores agrícolas en Estados Unidos, solo una hora, son $18, frente a los $12 de salario que se tiene durante todo un día de trabajo en Guatemala. Entonces, todos esos son factores de atracción y esa necesidad de trabajadores y trabajadoras que existe en Estados Unidos y en otros países del norte. Pero aquí tenemos uno de los factores que son pues, más absurdos, ¿no? De todo este análisis migratorio, y es el coste que implica para un migrante un migrante irregular, cuando inicia su senda hacia la frontera norte, pues puede hacer un promedio de inversión de $7.000 en el pago de coyotes, el pago de intermediarios, smugglers. Calculen, pueden tomar nota de que en el año fiscal 2023, en la frontera entre México y Estados Unidos, se detuvieron a 2,5 millones de personas intentando cruzar esa frontera. De esas 2,5 millones de personas había 220.000 que eran guatemaltecos. Pueden multiplicar, pueden hacer esa estimación, multipliquen 220.000 por $7.000. Son cifras a lo bruto, pero solo para tener un orden de magnitud de lo que implica en el 2023, de lo que implicó, por ejemplo, para los guatemaltecos, ese camino arriesgado de intentar llegar a Estados Unidos. Por otro lado, cuando llegan a Estados Unidos, existe la posibilidad de finalmente cruzar la frontera, pero existe la posibilidad de que también te detengan, y esa detención en muchos casos implica una deportación. En el año 2022 Estados Unidos deportó más de 40.000 personas, más de 40.000 guatemaltecos, en 368 vuelos desde Estados Unidos hasta Guatemala. Eso implicó un coste promedio, no del vuelo solo, sino de todo el proceso legal, de la estancia, todo lo que ello conlleva. Es un coste promedio, según estimaciones hechas por medios de comunicación de Estados Unidos, de $10.000 por persona deportada. Multipliquen nuevamente 40.000 guatemaltecos por $10.000 del coste promedio, que como digo, no solo el vuelo, sino el conjunto de lo que implica esa detención y deportación. Pero hay alternativas, y estas alternativas, ¿dónde las encontramos? Pues miren, aquí tenemos las grandes cifras migratorias irregulares también, entre países centroamericanos, México y Estados Unidos. Y aquí tomen en cuenta esta fila donde vienen el número de personas detenidas en 2023 según su nacionalidad. Vemos que hubo, por ejemplo, 700.000 mexicanos, 220.000 guatemaltecos, como les dije anteriormente, y vean también esta otra fila que ahora les señalo, y aquí se habla, y empezamos a hablar ya de alternativas, de personas que viajaron a Estados Unidos y también a Canadá con una visa temporal de trabajo, una visa de migración circular, en la mayoría de los casos vinculada a trabajos agrícolas. Entonces pueden ver que en el caso son datos de 2021, que han ido creciendo en estos últimos años, pero vemos que en el caso de México fueron casi 400.000 personas, frente a las 700.000 que fueron detenidas en la frontera entre Estados Unidos y México. Quédense con esa cifra, casi 400.000 personas están yendo desde México a trabajar con una visa circular. Y aquí tenemos una gráfica que resume a lo largo de los últimos 60 años cuál ha sido la interacción entre la concesión de visas para trabajar de forma legal en Estados Unidos para mexicanos con el número de personas que son detenidas en la frontera. Las visas vienen en color verde y las detenciones vienen en color rojo. Pues se ve claramente, esto empezando desde los años 40 del pasado siglo, que cuando aumentan las visas se reduce el número de migrantes irregulares y viceversa. Y a partir de este estudio, Acción contra el Hambre, ya estamos concluyendo, a partir de estos indicios de que la migración, si la gente tiene la posibilidad de migrar de forma legal, en este caso con visas de trabajo temporal, si tienen esa opción, pues vamos a ver qué impacto tiene los hogares que acceden a ese tipo de programas en comparación con los hogares en los que la experiencia migratoria, en el caso de Guatemala, se hace de forma irregular. Y eso nos permitió llevar a cabo a lo largo de 2022 una investigación donde comparábamos hogares con ese tipo de características, donde la experiencia era de forma migratoria circular y en el otro caso hogares o familias con migración irregular. Y ahí los resultados que obtuvimos, para hacérselo sencillo, fueron enormemente, significativamente positivos en relación a la experiencia de migración circular en comparación con la situación que encontrábamos en los hogares que habían tenido experiencia migratoria irregular y también cuando se comparaba con hogares en los que no había habido ningún tipo de migración. Utilizando indicadores distintos de pobreza, de seguridad alimentaria, de mejora en la vivienda, de inversión en la vivienda, en todos estos indicadores socioeconómicos, la experiencia migratoria circular conllevaba una mejora notable en la capacidad de inversión, en las condiciones de vida de las familias que tenían algunos de sus miembros con migración, que habían participado en programas de migración circular. Ya por último, esto también se ve que tiene un impacto en las comunidades donde se consiguen visas de migración circular, disminuye la incidencia de vecinos, de miembros de familias que intentan el camino irregular de migración hacia el norte. Y esto es también un impacto muy importante. Y finalmente, les voy a dejar la experiencia. Hemos estado hablando de cifras, pero quiero que también conozcan personas concretas, migrantes circulares, que compartan lo que son su vivencia y que puedan acceder a estos estudios que hemos llevado a cabo pues, a través de estos códigos QR. Esta es ya la última lámina. El de la izquierda es el informe del estudio que llevamos a cabo junto con OIM y USAID en el 22, donde viene todo este detalle. Y a la derecha lo que pueden ver son testimonios, es un documento con testimonios de 6 migrantes circulares que han tenido la oportunidad de ir a Estados Unidos, regresar a su casa y hacer realidad el sueño americano, pero en Guatemala. Así que ese es un poco lo que quería compartir con todos ustedes. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Miguel. Thank you very much. And I think that also the key message on when we talk about markets, we are talking about people. And I think that also when we talk about labor market, we're talking about jobs. And when we're talking about jobs, it's for source of income of people that are people in the center, of course. I would let the word to Carrie, right, to present the next presentation, if that's fine.
Absolutely. So Miguel has given us an example of a very formalized system that's crossing a border. We also wanted to bring an example from southern Madagascar, which there's a lot of talk about Madagascar these days on the USAID side. And one of the things I noticed when I was there last year was how some agricultural families had a member of the household that would travel just as a normal part of their livelihoods. And the resilience of that family relied on that migration. So we have Samantha Holben, who is the CEO of the Maharo project, CRS's Maharo project, which is a RIFSA in southern Madagascar. Samantha, welcome. Let's make sure.
Thanks so much, Carrie.
Great.
Yes, my power went out, so I'm sitting here in the dark.
Well, welcome all the same. I think we've got your slides.
Okay, so should I just kick it off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. As Carrie said, I'm Samantha Holben, and I'm Chief of Party for the Maharo Security Project, funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance and implemented by Catholic Relief Services. As Carrie mentioned, Maharo is implemented in the south of Madagascar. And Madagascar is a really special island country that's renowned for its unique biodiversity as well as diverse landscapes. Next slide, please. So just a couple of words about Maharo. The project is what USAID calls a RIFSA, which is a project that delivers humanitarian assistance in the form of food and cash transfers during the most critical.
Sorry to interrupt, Samantha. I think it's me, or maybe I am seeing the Skype and a bit of the presentation, just to check that everybody's seeing okay the presentation.
Sorry,
Also,
everyone.
with Skype.
Keep talking and I will fix it.
Okay. Anyway, we deliver cash and food transfers during the most critical times of the year. And then we also deliver development assistance, building capacity, strengthening governance structures, and promoting income generating activities throughout the rest of the year. So it's a little bit of both. The rationale is to work with the local populations to build their capacity and assets so that they're more resilient to crises and vulnerability that they face. We target more than 55,000 households across the deep south of Madagascar, which is, actually go back one slide, please, which is an arid zone that is prone to food insecurity. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification, known as the IPC, predicted that for this period that we're in right now, more than 1 million people will be in a food security crisis or worse. That means that they have acute malnutrition or will only be able to meet their minimum food needs by depleting essential assets or through crisis coping strategies. The drivers of poverty and food insecurity are many. There's natural climate hazards, including droughts and storms and cyclones, and also deforestation and land degradation that's been getting worse in recent years. Economic instability, such as COVID-19 and the conflict in Ukraine, which has further sort of reduced the spending capacity of households and have made them more poor. Very limited infrastructure exists, like roads and water and electricity are very dire there. Early marriage and sexual exploitation of girls, as well as gender-based violence, reduce women and girls' access to livelihoods, opportunities, and education. And then finally, increasing social conflict, which is both a cause and a consequence of food insecurity. In Deep South, we've been seeing a lot more incidents of crime, organized crime, and Zebu theft. So in this context, we prioritize the most vulnerable households, those that lack productive resources, as well as those that are single-headed households, and migration is definitely a factor there, cyclical migration. Next slide, please. So southern Madagascar is a region where the livelihoods of the people are very closely tied to the environment. And historically, communities in the south rely on subsistence agriculture, cattle herding, and fishing. The semi-arid climate has always posed challenges and has led to periodic circular migration. And migration is not at all new to the south. It's occurred for at least the last 100 years, more than 100 years, from the colonial times, when actually colonial policies encouraged migration so that they could have labor for cash crops. But also in the post-colonial period, there was a lot of migration. Some political instability led to the need for people to travel to other zones to make money. And in the past 20 years, we've seen a lot more climate migration. So as people cannot, raise the crops that they need to feed their families, they migrate to other parts of the country to either earn cash or do their cropping there. So despite the fact that migration within Madagascar has been going on for such a long time, in 2019, the International Organization on Migration noted that internal migration is relatively low on the country's political agenda, and awareness among the public is also quite low. So there's very little understanding about the drivers of internal migration, its characteristics, and what the wider impacts are on both the origin communities and the destinations. So interesting that. Go to the next slide, please. Oh, wait, go back one. Yes. So we've observed that internal migration has long been a key livelihood strategy and a feature of Malagasy society, with people moving for a whole variety of reasons. And many of the drivers of poverty and food insecurity that I mentioned before are also the ones that drive migration from the deep south. So we see seasonal migration that's linked to agriculture, where people move to rice production zones or cash crop production zones. We've seen people migrate in search of other lands to cultivate. All the agriculture is rain-fed, so when there's no rain, people move. There's migration that's linked to Zebu cattle herding. So people move with their crops to where there's other water sources and grazing opportunities, and that is a very circular migration process. There's the climate causes that I mentioned, and then there's like new opportunities that people have been exploiting, like migration for mining, which has posed significant challenges for feeding all those people who rush to one site to participate in a mining boom. And then also there's exploitation of natural resources to manufacture and sell charcoal, which has led to large-scale deforestation. And then also some farmers are starting to shift over to coastal areas where they do fishing, because there's this perception that fishing doesn't require a lot of skill, very low technical resources that are required, and the results are really fast. So they're very attracted to that as a way to generate quick and easy income. Next slide, please. Oh, are you frozen? Okay, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm just going to keep talking.
We can
The
hear
next-
you
hear you.
and not frozen.
Okay, okay, great, thanks. Okay, it should be on the slide that says migration, destination, and intensity.
Yes.
Okay, it's not, I don't see that on my computer.
Sorry, go back to this. There we go.
Thank you. So this slide shows examples of routes and destinations that attract migrants from southern Madagascar. And we've already discussed some of the primary drivers of internal migration. What we see is that migration is initiated during the dry periods of the year when the living conditions are the hardest in the south. And people migrate from their communities for 5 or 6 months at a time during these dry times, and then they return if there's harvest. In the case of Androy, we've seen that 13%, only 13% return from other regions, and 37% of migrants from Androy stay for more than a year at their destinations outside of the region. In addition to sort of internal migration, there is some migration out of the country to other countries that are close by, like Réunion and Comoros and Mauritius, and also to South Africa. But we see a lot more, at least from the Deep South, sort of internal cyclical migration. Next slide, please. So speaking about the positive impacts of migration, we have seen some positive impacts of migration. As was said before, migrating can build resilience. Migrants can increase their networks, have some income, build assets. And basically, people see migration as a solution, a possible solution to economic problems, the need for money for food, and also to meet their social and cultural commitments. And in the South, those are significant. So that's an option. Yay, light. Related to this, another possible positive impact of migration is when migrants have been able to generate incomes and send money home, increasing the incomes of those that remain in the village. It's not always the case, and some of our own data collection has shown that the frequency and the amount of remittances can be quite small and doesn't always meet the family's needs, but it's highly variable. Migration can strengthen family ties. We've seen that migrants from the south of Madagascar tend to maintain their culture and their social groups wherever they migrate to in the country. So they have a very strong culture, and migrating together sort of reinforces those ties. And also we see that people bring back knowledge that they've learned when they migrate, and then they transfer those skills to others in the village, that, you know, skills that people would not have learned if they hadn't left. Finally, migrants contribute to the economic development of their destination areas by working in sectors where their presence is absolutely essential. So those are some of the positives. Next slide, please. And finally, I find most of the literature and the discussion seem to focus heavily on the negative, of which there definitely are risks, and they include the upheaval of family life, you know, because usually it's the male head of household that leaves and the women are left to look after the children and the elderly. We found that in the Maharo zone, the people who are left behind are much more vulnerable in the community. And in some cases, instead of receiving remittances, they actually have to send money because their migrated family members can't afford to come back. Also, migrant precariousness and vulnerability to the areas that they move to. If they don't have family ties or cultural ties, then, you know, we've seen in Fort Dauphin, which is one of the major cities that people migrate to in the South, that migrants from Androy are sleeping outside, they're squatting in buildings, they're just having a very difficult time. And then finally, erosion of natural resources that includes both forests and fish resources. Because often migrants who move to new zones don't really know the customary practices for managing the resources. They're not part of those discussions, and they're moving into areas and infringing on customary rights of others that are natives to the area. And finally, the last point here should be that insecurity and vulnerability to crime in the source villages is an increasing problem, and migration plays a role in that, because when only the elderly men, women, and children are present, the village becomes much more vulnerable to attacks, and it's a source of conflict for the community, and social cohesion is undermined, and this is felt most acutely by the vulnerable. All right. I think that's where I want. Yeah, I'm not going to go through these last slides because they're a little too techy, and I know we wanted to have this be a conversation. But I wanted to say, just in conclusion, that in our intervention zone, we see migration as one of the coping strategies that's regularly used by the local population in the event of an emergency. We've observed both that migration can be highly localized, like within the same commune for short-term opportunities, as well as to other regions that are across the country. And we've seen that sometimes migration doesn't pay off. We had focus group discussions with men from Androy who were working as bicycle taxi drivers in Tuliar, which is a city on the coast. And they talked about a strong desire to return home, but the difficulty doing so because of lack of money. Though our project doesn't address migration head-on, our interventions do promote social cohesion and provide safety nets for the most vulnerable households whose members have migrated away. So that's an important role that we play. And in terms of food distributions, program participants have said that the possibility of receiving a food distribution may be enough to dissuade them from attempting to migrate. In terms of implementation, we see a lot more women in the villages. So our program is sort of tilted towards improving access of the women to our technical activities and designing activities that are of interest to them and that they can participate in due to the timing. And on a positive note, our staff observe that when people migrate back or come back to their home villages, that they bring with them new ideas and a new vision to their community and hope to their community. And some women who have migrated away with their families come back, even become leaders in their communities because they've made this arduous journey. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks for this opportunity to start the conversation. I think there is a role for projects like RIFSA's definitely to acknowledge that migration is a fact and it's something that we should be dealing with head on instead of just sort of ignoring. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Samantha. It's really nice to see the contrast between the different ways that migration was approached in the different projects. And I agree with you completely. We've got to start thinking about it more and challenging our own assumptions that the kind of aid community has. Jimena, maybe we can pivot towards the Q&A now. We've still got about 15 minutes. Jimena, I'm going to hand over to you with the first question because it's in Spanish in the Q&A.
Sure. This question is for Miguel on how the different enterprise and HR, the way that translating Spanish from English, I will not say, but so I will say it aloud in Spanish and the translator can translate. ¿Cómo surgen las iniciativas de las empresas de recursos humanos para que las personas puedan aplicar a visas para migrar de forma circular? ¿Se conocen cuáles son los incentivos que les llevan a desarrollar este tipo de servicio?
Buena pregunta. Depende mucho del país de destino. Del país de destino al que se dirigen estos migrantes en programas de migración circular o de migración laboral con una intención más permanente. El primer paso es la demanda de trabajadores por parte de la empresa. Y esta demanda normalmente la canalizan a los ministerios de trabajo, a los Labor Department, en el caso de Estados Unidos, planteando que para una determinada actividad y en un determinado periodo necesita X cantidad de trabajadores con un perfil determinado. En el caso de Estados Unidos, se exige a las empresas demostrar que no hay demandantes de esos puestos en la zona en la que se encuentra la empresa. Una vez hecha esa verificación, la persona está habilitada para solicitar ese cupo de trabajadores y también para hacer una selección del país a los cuales quisiera estar recibiendo trabajadores. Esto es importante por el coste del viaje. Claro, Estados Unidos tiene una preferencia con México, pues porque son trabajadores de un país vecino. Cuanto más nos alejamos de Estados Unidos, el coste del viaje, que es asumido por el empleador en el caso de Estados Unidos, pues no hace tan atractiva la posibilidad, ¿no? Pero no lo excluye, ¿eh? Igual hay también trabajadores de sudeste asiático que temporalmente están desplazándose a Estados Unidos o desde Indonesia a Suecia. O sea que el tema de los costes del viaje son relativamente una limitación. En definitiva, todo parte de la necesidad de trabajadores que tengan las empresas y del proceso que se establezca en cada país para canalizar esa solicitud.
Thanks, Miguel. Our second question is for you, Samantha. And it's asking how the migration affects the design of your programming and your, in particular, the program target households. How do you manage the programming when it comes to trying to, I think it's getting at identify and design for the specific target households?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is, well, it should inform the design of the project, right? I came into this project in the 5th year of the implementation, so I wasn't around for those early conversations about it. But it seems to me that when the project was designed, migration was only mentioned in the technical proposal as sort of one of those context factors, that, it's hot, it's dry, there's migration. But there were no specific actions or interventions designed specifically around that, which I think is a conscious choice that we need to make in our programming from now on, because we can't be migration neutral or migration blind anymore. It's just not going to work. And in the implementation of our project, I can tell you, even in the 5th year, that implementation, which depends on participation of community volunteers, right, who you train up and they deliver technical assistance in their own villages, sort of as agents of change. We've had to recruit more because people migrate away and they take that investment and that knowledge to different parts of the country, which is great, but it leaves us stuck in the zone. So we have to sort of account for that and figure out a way that we can make it work for us. Can I add one thing?
Absolutely.
I was in a forum last week with other USAID implementers, and someone from the north of the country who implements an environment-focused project said to me, directed a question to me, what are you doing to stop migration from your zone? Because all the people there are coming to my zone and they're, depleting the natural resources. So I think that question sort of reveals sort of a misconception that perhaps projects should be trying to stop migration, which is like trying to stop the tide, right? I think we need to factor it into how we deliver our assistance. And I think maybe stronger coordination between projects in zones that are sources of migrants and projects that are in the destination zones. We can work together on that.
I just dropped in the chat a really interesting piece of research to your point there, Samantha, from Cambridge on 12 reasons why people return home. And so after being migrants, and I was like, I read it and I was like, of course, but I bet you nobody in this webinar today ever like looked at a list like that and said, yes, we have to build in communications around those elements into our programs. Over to you, Jimena. I think there's one from Celia, which used to be in Spanish,
Celia?
but now isn't.
You change it to English. Okay, great. So, okay. According to your experience, what recommendations would you give to interact with labor markets, government entities, and recruiting companies to design programs to promote regular migration? I don't know
That's
if
probably for
Miguel,
Miguel.
you want to take it. And then the other questions, let me read it, and that you want was in Spanish. Based on, I will switch. Basado en un enfoque de derechos humanos, bajo el cual entiendo que nos regimos todas las organizaciones, ¿cuál consideráis que es el lenguaje correcto? Escuchamos en estos días mucho el término migración ilegal y considero que esto no respeta un enfoque de derechos. ¿Qué opinan los panelistas? I will take that one. In that sense, yes, definitely we talk about regular and irregular migration. And pathways, we definitely can sometimes there's a difficult to draw a line between some type of displacement, forced displacement, internal displacement, cross-border displacement, and some voluntary migration that are due to different reasons, like Miguel was explaining in terms of degradation, environmental degradation, and lack of employment, etc. However, it's really important to engage in the right language, because also from a market-based programming point of view, I think that the different access to different rights, the different access to labor market, the different way they interact with remittance, and the way they also access to different financing mechanisms will differ depending on the different status that different people are when they are moving. But then to you, Miguel, to go more on your recommendations on the last question.
Sí, bueno, he compartido unos links de los estudios que estaban en código QR. En el estudio que hicimos sobre la migración, la comparación de la experiencia de migración circular o de migración irregular entre Guatemala y Estados Unidos y Canadá, ahí vienen distintos resúmenes ejecutivos, unos pensados para tomadores de decisión en Guatemala, otros para tomadores de decisión en Estados Unidos e incluso para Canadá también. Y se hace un énfasis especial en recomendaciones que surgen de este estudio, ¿no? de este trabajo. Algo que es fundamental de recomendaciones que yo me quedaría es romper los silos que hay entre los actores de desarrollo internacional y los actores que trabajan en el ámbito migratorio. Eso creo que tendría un impacto enorme, el poder permitir que colaboraran, que tuvieran estrategias conjuntas, porque de momento responden a lógicas y a institucionalidades en los gobiernos que son distintas, ¿no? El Departamento de Trabajo, en el caso de Estados Unidos, USAID, el Departamento de Estado, que tienen en ocasiones pues sus propias lógicas y sus propias agendas. Entonces, cruzar eso ya sería muy importante. ¿Y de qué forma se puede concretar? Voy a poner un ejemplo en el caso de Guatemala. Ahora mismo en Guatemala hay cerca de 20.000 personas que están viajando, hay más de 20.000 personas que están viajando cada año a Estados Unidos y Canadá. Pero la mayoría de estas personas proceden de hora y media, 2 horas en las cercanías de la capital. El departamento de Chimaltenango, por ejemplo. Son departamentos que no tienen tanta presión migratoria irregular o no tienen niveles de pobreza o niveles de expulsión de población tan grandes como, por ejemplo, Huehuetenango, en la frontera con México, que tiene un porcentaje muy pequeño de personas participando en el programa de migración circular. Simplemente ayudando a focalizar la contratación en esos territorios donde hay mayor migración irregular, estaría casi seguro que se reduciría de una forma significativa. Si el número de migrantes regulares o circulares es importante, pues seguro que habría un impacto en reducir la migración irregular procedente de esos lugares. Esa sería una recomendación, por ejemplo.
Fantastic. I really don't want to end also. I think it's interesting your experience, Sasha, on you have been working with the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, and I think that in the discourse you share already some learnings and some reflection that that are fantastic also to this discussion. So I give the floor to you, Sasha, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jimena and Carrie and Miguel and Samantha, and also thanks to everyone for listening. I think one of the things that comes out of this is it's such a deep topic, and there are so many facets. And as we know, has come out in the chat, there's all of this other stuff that comes into migration, people's fears and prejudices and government policy and governments wanting to be reelected and all of this stuff that comes up. So it's a very deep topic with a lot of nuances and challenges that which is why we like to deal with nice markets where everybody stays where they are, right? That takes care of some of the challenges, but as Samantha said, you can't stop the tide. So and I think one of the interesting things it is very localized. You have issues of refugees where there's a lot of common ties and kinship. If you look at things like Somali refugees and migrants in Ethiopia and Somaliland, they have the same ethnic background. There's relations. That's a very different thing when a group of people move into a country where they don't have a lot of ties. So I think to sum up, this is a very deep topic. Mick is hoping to do more on this topic in the next year. We would love to hear from all of you if you have specific aspects of this related to migrants, related to refugees, circular, one way, all of the different aspects. Please let us know if there's other topics you'd like us to dig into with the webinars or maybe case studies. And I think we'll keep discussing this over the year. I don't know, Jimena and Carrie, if there's anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just to put a little push in for Mick. I feel like I still have a whole bunch I want to talk about. I want to respond to Miguel's comment and go deeper on Samantha's. Come join us on the Mick. If there's something that just interested you or something that's still moving around in your head, drop a question, comment, perspective into the Mick, and we can then continue this conversation, because that's really what the Mick is all about, is a space where we can have interesting conversations. And like, it's not a donor report. Nobody's checking your spelling. It's great. You're allowed to just have a question, an opinion, whatever. Jimena?
Well, thanks to all. I think that you have already said this is the point of having this. That's why I don't like the word webinar. I think it's just a huge meeting, when we have a luxury of having these fantastic panelists coming to enlighten the dialogue, and just continue posting your questions in the Mic. We put the discourse group link in the chat. Just subscribe if you're not subscribed, post your question, and the AC and the facilitators will do their best to answer it through the discourse or through this type of format that I think also they're working really well. And yeah, don't forget that at the end, market-based programming is putting people in the center. We did last time a webinar, a conversation on this. And last time there was a climate one. So we are building, it's a learning agenda. And they see here it's only to support, to facilitate. So don't hesitate to continue reaching out the community of practice, and we will continue having this conversation, which for me, it's fascinating. And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you, everybody. And yes, we'll
Thank
continue
you.
the discussion on discourse. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.